Ryan was the type of person who easily faded into the background. It was a shame because he was incredibly smart, yet he rarely stood out, whether at school or at home. Our classmates barely noticed his presence, and his parents were no better, often acting as if he didn't exist. But I saw Ryan. I was his only friend. The one person who understood his pain and recognized his keen mind. Everything changed on the night of the senior dance. Ryan finally worked up the nerve to ask Lily to be his date. She was beautiful, and they'd shared many classes over the years. He had a big crush on her, so this was a brave step, driven by a deep desire to escape his isolation. But when he asked, she laughed in his face. The rejection was humiliating, public, and deeply hurtful. Though I tried to console him, I could tell Ryan had already begun withdrawing into a darker place. Teachers started catching him staring at Lily frequently, and once, in class, he began muttering to himself, only noticing when other students pointed it out. His mother grew worried, noticing he'd spend hours talking to an old childhood toy. Meanwhile, his father was often away, out hunting with his friends. I should have paid closer attention to the signs. I should have acted, but I didn't. When I arrived at the dance that night, Ryan was nowhere to be seen. I figured he was too embarrassed to show up after what happened with Lily. The gym was decorated with the usual cheap streamers and balloons you'd expect at a high school event. Kids were dancing, laughing, and I tried my best to impress my date, Mia, with jokes. But I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. About an hour into the dance, the loudspeaker blared with an emergency lockdown alarm.
Lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building, lock the door, and turn off all lights. Wait for the all clear from school officials or local authorities. Lockdown, lockdown.
Gym lights flickered, leaving us in dimness. Panic spread as confused cries filled the room. I felt a sickening dread in the pit of my stomach. Ryan. Then, the gym door swung open. There, in the doorway, stood a figure, twisted and unrecognizable, wearing a mask. It was Ryan. He clutched two of his father's hunting rifles and walked forward with chilling calmness, as if on a mission. "They'll notice me now," he said in a low, firm voice. Screams echoed as he pulled the trigger, hitting a student named Mark square in the chest. Blood sprayed across the gym floor, sparking chaos as students scrambled, ducking under tables and shoving each other in a desperate attempt to flee. But there was no escape. There was no way out. Ryan had locked the doors. I stood frozen, watching as my friend turned into something unrecognizable, something monstrous. He moved with a chilling precision, firing without a second thought. I saw him shoot Sarah, the girl who had humiliated him the year before. She crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Next, he turned his aim on Mr. Johnson, our math teacher, who had bravely stepped in front of a group of students, trying to shield them. The bullet tore through Mr. Johnson's shoulder, and he dropped to the floor with a pained scream. "Ryan, stop! This isn't you!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed up in the chaos. Whether he heard me or simply ignored me, I couldn't tell. He continued mumbling, as if talking to voices only he could hear, justifying his actions, condemning those who had ever wronged him. Through the turmoil, I saw Lily, huddled under a table, crying. I knew he wouldn't stop until he found her. I pushed my way through the terrified crowd, desperate to reach him. The closer I got, the more I could see the madness in his eyes. He wasn't the Ryan I knew. This was someone else, taken over by the demons he had held inside for so long. "Remember me now," he shouted, his voice echoing through the gym as he continued his rampage. The air filled with screams and the deafening blasts of gunfire. Bodies strewn across the floor, blood pooling in dark, spreading stains. The horror felt unending, stretching on and on, until finally, the police burst in, bringing an end to the nightmare. They took him down with a single shot. I lay there, bleeding and helpless, watching as they dragged Ryan's body away. It had been 2 years, and I could remember every moment vividly. It was the end of the school year, and students were pouring into their last period. My class was history, a subject I struggled with and disliked, especially because of the teacher. As I walked through the crowded hallway, I heard the same announcement for what felt like the millionth time. Mr. Thompson was going to drone on about the Civil War again. Just the thought made my stomach twist. To escape the boring lecture, I made a quick decision. I would hide out in the back bathroom until the bell rang, maybe for the last time in my life. I picked the farthest stall, thinking it would be my sanctuary from the chaos. Leaning against the cool metal wall, I pulled out my phone, hoping to find some games to distract me while I waited. Just then, the principal's voice blared through the intercom, cutting through the quiet like a knife. "Lockdown! Lockdown! This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room, lock the door, and turn off all lights." At first I thought I had misheard. Surely it was just another drill. I shrugged it off and kept scrolling through my phone, but a moment later, the lights went out. The bathroom was plunged into complete darkness. The familiar hum of the AC unit stopped, and an unsettling silence enveloped me. My heart raced. Power outages during drills had never happened before. Panicking, I quickly texted my friend, hoping to understand what was going on. "Hey, what's happening?" I typed, my fingers trembling. Almost immediately he replied, "Dude, where are you? It's locked down." Confusion washed over me as I read his message. "Everyone's looking for you," he added. My heart sank. I explained I was in the bathroom, hiding. But then he sent back something that made my blood run cold. "Some guy with a knife is banging on classroom doors." Fear gripped me. My classroom and the bathroom were on the same floor, putting me in serious danger. I quickly turned off my phone and listened closely. Every tiny sound echoed eerily in the silence. Footsteps echoed down the hall, and I held my breath as I listened to the bathroom door creak open. My heart raced. Someone stepped inside and moved to the stall next to mine. Terror surged through me, reminding me of all the horror movies I had seen, where characters found themselves in situations like this. Taking a deep breath, I tried to steady myself. The footsteps grew closer, and I wondered who it was. Were they a student, or something more dangerous? I wanted to scream, but I knew I had to stay quiet. Then I heard something, a low, muffled voice. It was speaking, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart thumped louder in my chest, drowning out the noise around me. Suddenly, I realized I was not just hiding. I was trapped in a nightmare, waiting to see if the next moment would bring safety or something far worse. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I could only hope for a way out. I threw open my stall door and, peering to my right, I spotted him, frozen in place. "Aren't you leaving?" I asked, surprised. He replied, Yeah, man, just give me a couple of minutes." I didn't think much of it at the time, too focused on getting out of there myself. As I exited the bathroom and headed toward the front door, a wave of anxiety hit me as I realized something was wrong. My phone started ringing again, and my friend's messages began to flood my screen, explaining the chaos unfolding outside. A kid, a couple of years older than us, had tried to rob a gas station nearby at knife point. When he failed, he'd run into our school after injuring a few people. I shivered at the last part as my friend explained why the police were in the building. They were looking for the boy, who was still hiding somewhere inside. Panic set in, and I began running toward the front doors. Once outside, the chaos was overwhelming. Policemen were directing students to safety, their faces tense with urgency. I rushed over to one, breathlessly explaining what had happened in the bathroom. The officers immediately stiffened, their faces taking on grim expressions of intent. One barked out an order, and a team headed back toward the bathroom. I watched them disappear into the building, only to return about 5 minutes later. "There's nobody there," one officer reported, but added that the bathroom window was broken. The kid must have escaped. A shiver went down my spine as I realized how close I'd been to a dangerous criminal. No words could fully capture the mixture of gratitude and horror I felt in that moment. School soon returned to normal after the incident, but I knew I would remember that day for the rest of my life. The fear, the darkness, and the mysterious boy in the stall next to me. That was the day that changed everything in my mind about safety, a moment I would carry with me forever. It was just an ordinary school day, the kind you forget as soon as the final bell rings. History class had me sitting among the usual faces as Mr. Watton lectured on ancient civilizations, his voice a quiet drone in the background. I doodled absent-mindedly in my notebook, drifting between daydreams of summer vacation and thoughts about what to eat for lunch. Suddenly, a soft knock snapped me out of my reverie. A student aide from the office walked in, holding a note. She approached Mr. Watton, who paused his lecture to read it. After a moment, he looked up and called my name. I was puzzled. What could this be about? I hadn't heard about any appointments, and a mix of curiosity and anxiety set my heart racing. I stood up, feeling both nervous and intrigued, and made my way to the front of the class. "See you later, pal," Mr. Watton said, handing me an assignment along with the note, which now served as my hall pass. I glanced at the note. "I'll be there to pick you up for your appointment at 10:30, Mom." A slight unease crept over me as I checked my watch. It was still only 10:28. Why hadn't my mom mentioned any appointment? I tried to brush off the uneasy feeling, convincing myself it was probably just a routine checkup or something simple. As I walked down the dim hallways, the buzzing fluorescent lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. To my left was the side door, where parents usually waited to pick up their kids after school. Outside, a minivan idled, an unremarkable color, one that was hard to place. I slowed down, scanning the parking lot for the familiar shape of my mom's van. Nothing. Just then, the front passenger window of the minivan rolled down, and a woman leaned out, her gaze locked onto mine. "I'm here to pick you up," she said, smiling, though it was an expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Your mom asked me to." A sense of dread tightened in my stomach. I'd never seen this woman before. "How do you know my mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady but laced with suspicion. "Oh, we're old friends," she replied casually, but there was something off about her tone, making the alarm bells in my mind blare louder. "I don't think I'm comfortable with that," I said firmly. "I'll just wait for my mom." I took a step back, every instinct urging me to get away. Her smile grew, and it chilled me to the core. I turned, reaching for the side doors, but found them locked. Panic surged through me as I frantically pushed at the doors, each second stretching into what felt like an eternity. I had forgotten that all exits stayed locked during school hours. Just then, I spotted the minivan again. The sliding door opened, and a man stepped out, a tall figure with broad shoulders, his expression unreadable as he started walking toward me from a distance. Trapped, I realized I had no choice but to run. I darted around the side of the school, sprinting at full speed toward the front entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. Bursting through the front doors, I nearly collided with the lady seated behind the security desk, almost sending her toppling back in her chair. She looked at me, startled. "ID, please," she said, her voice stiff and unfazed, showing no emotion as I scrambled to find my words. Words tumbled out of my mouth in a rush. "There's a woman and a man outside. They're trying to pick me up, but I don't know them." Her face shifted, concern replacing her initial surprise. After examining my identification, her frown deepened. "Just a minute," she said, reaching for the telephone. I waited, feeling the weight of each second bearing down on me, every tick seeming like an eternity. Finally, she handed me a pass to return to class. Relieved, I walked back through the now familiar hallways, though a lingering unease remained. The hallways felt eerily silent, each step heavy with dread as I returned to history class. All eyes turned toward me as I walked in, and Mr. Watton paused mid-sentence, a look of confusion furrowing his brow. "Back so soon?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Yeah, there was a mix-up," I replied, trying to sound casual even though adrenaline was still pumping through my veins. Heart pounding, I slumped into my seat. It wasn't long before the bell rang, signaling it was time for English. Miss Gallo was kind, though at times almost annoyingly so. About 20 minutes into class, she received a phone call. Her expression shifted, darkening as she whispered, "We are going into lockdown. This is not a drill." A wave of fear washed over me. We'd practiced lockdown drills before, but this was different. We moved silently to line up against the wall, away from the door's view. The room was completely silent, except for the nervous whispers of my classmates, the tension so thick you could feel it. After what felt like an eternity, Miss Gallo took another call. She returned, visibly relieved, and told us that the lockdown had been lifted. We all exhaled, relaxing back into our lesson. It wasn't until the end of the school day that I found out what the lockdown had been for. Someone had entered the school, slipping past the security desk and ignoring the guard's demands to stop, making his way down the hallways. That was why we'd been put on lockdown. And then I learned the truth. He was the same man who had tried to pick me up outside. The realization hit me like ice water. Those strangers in the minivan had devised an elaborate scheme to lure me away, and I had narrowly escaped. Who were they? How did they know me? My mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last.